you've experimented a lot with diets. What's your sort of current conclusion or bottom line as it stands now for triathletes?
Current conclusion with overall diet is eat well. And by eat well, I mean eat a lot of natural foods. It doesn't have to be all natural, all organic all the time, because you got to live, and sometimes you just got to put a bar in your bag and pull out a bar and have convenient food because you need to eat a lot as an endurance athlete. So eat a lot, eat mostly well. Make sure, this is a quirk that I've changed in the last year and a half, is have a lot of fiber, have a lot of chia seeds, a lot of overnight oats, a lot of salads and roughage, a lot of sweet potatoes and potatoes, rice and potatoes. If you can cook that, cool it, and then eat it the next day, all of a sudden it becomes resistant starch. Absolutely phenomenal for the gut. Do all those things. And as a principle, whether you are vegan or vegetarian or low carb, I'm not super fussed about. The one thing for endurance athletes that I am a little bit fussed about, that I will say for the rest of my life, because it's just as simple as math, is a timed carb approach to be able to improve your fat oxidation is very hard to argue with. If you look at the average endurance athlete, the average person eating a Western diet, being able to burn 0.4 grams of body fat per minute, it's just not enough to be able to get through anything longer than about a 4.5 hour race. You just run out of fuel. If you can up that to about 1.2 grams of body fat per minute, which you can do fairly easily just by restricting carbs before and during the low intensity training that you do, very easily you can get that body fat burning during exercise up by about 3 times, and instantly you end up in this state where you're not running out of energy at any point. You can go for a 30-hour ultra run and you're not going to run out of energy. What I've changed is strict carb restriction during heavy training. When I was working with Dr. Dan Plews, and this works for him and works for a lot of athletes that he works with, it was very strict. It was no more than 130 grams of carbs per day. Doesn't matter if you up your training or you feel like you're not doing well or lethargic, 130 grams, that's about it. And I look at it as, you know what? I came into working with Dan Plews already with a very high ability to burn fat as fuel, because I had that timed carb approach before without the restriction. And I think that the strict restriction might have led to some of the depression issues and a little bit of the weight gain, the stomach issues that I had, because it's just not balanced enough. So I think balanced, eat good food, time your carbs, but don't restrict anything one way or the other, is sort of my opinion on it. But what works for me is not what works for everyone else. Like, the nuances are very, very different for everyone else, with morals and dietary preferences and allergies and things like that. But if you stick to those big things of like eat lots of fiber, time your carbs at certain moments of your training, and eat really well, I think that gives people enough lateral movement to work it within their restrictions.
So it sounds like you went from hardcore restriction now to timing, and timing sounds like the key word here.
Timing, yeah. Yeah, just pick your moments. We pick our moments to do a VO2 max session or to do a long endurance session. Pick your moments to have carbs and not have carbs.
Yeah, I wanted to ask on that because but I think you've touched a little bit on Dr. Dan Plews and his.
Yeah, and you work with Dan, brilliant guy.
So I think my question now is really more towards the listeners or the viewers who's probably still experimenting. Even for myself, I'm still experimenting in terms of what is optimal for me and what is not optimal for me. So what typically what we go through, even for myself, is that I would, listen to one person and then they say, okay, this is what you need to do. And then I'll listen to another person who probably sits on the other end and this is what you need to do. So for someone like me who's trying to experiment in terms of what is optimal and what is not optimal, what's your advice? What did you go through when you went through the very strict LCHF and then you are trying to either grow out of it or move out of it and then try to find a nice balance where it really fits your lifestyle and your body? what's your advice for people who's going through this, for people like me who's trying to experiment in terms of what would be good and what would not be good?
That's hard to answer because it starts getting into specifics for everyone. And I'll tell you just my occurrence, what happened with me. So before I worked with Dan Plews and did LCHF, low carb, healthy fat, I was doing the timed carb approach. And into a lab, when we started working with Dan Plews, I was burning about 1.2 grams of fat per minute. Pretty good. Very acceptable to have a good race. But we still went onto a restrictive LCHF diet. Now, when you go onto a strict LCHF diet, this isn't typical, this isn't prescribed in the diet, but it just kind of happens because the amount of carbs that you have is pretty tight. What ends up coming out are a lot of fibers, because fibers are counted as carbs. So things like sweet potatoes, cooked and cooled rice, chia seeds, all these salads, not so much because they're a lot less calories, but salads, a lot of those things just get stripped out of the diet. And when that happens, your gut starts, it doesn't have that fiber to feed on. It does, the good bacteria in your gut doesn't have the fiber to feed on. So there can be an imbalance between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria, where the bad bacteria takes over. What I experienced was just insatiable hunger. And this is often what happens when there's an imbalance in your gut bacteria. And I attribute it to not having that roughage to feed the good bacteria. So when I got off of it, I said, you know what, I'm just going to back away. I'm going to still do the timed carb approach so that I don't just go back to sugar burning and not being able to burn fat as fuel, but I'm going to focus on these good fibers. And I started feeling better. All of a sudden, my cravings started going away. But because I was still just on the timed carb approach and I didn't want to just pound myself with carbs all the time when I didn't need them, it was basically like, do I need high performance energy with glucose and carbohydrates? Yes, I'll take them. No. Okay, I'll restrict them. I'm probably somewhere in between, I would guess an average of about maybe 180, 200 grams of carbs per day, which relative to most Western diets is still really low. Most Western diets are saying 600 grams of carbs per day for an athlete. So I'm still doing a third of that, and it doesn't feel like I'm restricting carbs whatsoever. And the carbs that I'm taking are green bananas that have lots of fiber, overnight oats, chia seeds, salads, sweet potatoes, cooked and cooled rice. And what ended up happening was, without restricting any calories, I started losing weight. So this whole thing about calories in, calories out, yeah, it does, like, essentially it kind of makes sense, but there's also other things like inflammation, like carrying water weight and things like that. And I started losing weight, looking better, feeling better just by adding this back in and having a more balanced approach. Is my fat burning ability going to be as high as it was when I was doing that strict carb restriction? Probably not. But I know I'm feeling a lot healthier. I know I'm feeling better. I'm not having these issues where I'm calling nutritionists going, what in the hell is going on? And doing GI map tests to figure this out. Things are starting to get back in line. So with all that said, I'll give it the analogy of fasted training. Does fasted training have a benefit? Yes, absolutely. Does it have a serious risk to it? Yes, absolutely. A lot of people who do fasted training end up having massive cravings later. Women who do fasted training have big hormone issues. In a lot of cases, it does the exact opposite to a female's body as what it's intended to do because it's too much stress to a female. So in my case, I recommend to my athletes, do not ever do fasted training because it's too risky. If you want to do fasted training, just have fat and protein before that workout that you want to do it for, and you're going to get 90 to 95% of the benefits of doing that workout in a fasted state, but without all of those risks. So that's what I look at, this balance of like roughly 200 grams of carbs, making sure that you still have fiber. You're still going to get the vast majority of the benefits without much of the risks. And that's what I see as the downside to a lot of the endurance industry, is that there's a paper here or a study there or an athlete here that does a certain thing, and then it gets taken to the very end of that spectrum in pure pursuit of performance while ignoring health. And I think that a balance is a little bit more right. So what that balance is for you, it's hard to say, but those are the things that I experienced. Hey everyone, Taren Gazelle, otherwise known as Triathlon Taren here. I'm the founder of Motive, and we help motivated humans, people like us, regular humans that have day jobs and families and real life commitments, live a more fulfilling and challenging life by going out and attempting feats that they didn't think that they could, typically with endurance sports, whether it's running, triathlon, or cycling, maybe swim runs, whatever endurance adventure you want to go on, we can help you do that.